So we went over there, and like I said, we weren't expecting to be missionaries. We weren't planning to be missionaries. It's just while we were there, God made it very evident that that is what we were to do. And so, but still, even though He made it evident, it wasn't like we were 100% on board from the beginning. It's a lot to leave America and to go live in an area like that, and then like one of our sons doesn't have a thyroid at all, and so we had to figure out, can we find a endocrinologist up in that area of Brazil? Because typically when you think of Brazil, most of the stuff that you have probably seen of Brazil, if it's not one of the natural attractions, it's probably Rio or Sao Paulo, or one of the major metropolises that have millions of people in them. And that's a very developed area. You could find whatever you need there, but we're up, that's way down here in this area. We're about 2,000 miles farther north than that, and so it's not as, there's developed areas, but it's not just it's not near the same as if you were down in one of the major metropolises. And so it took us a couple months to finally find a endocrinologist, and because the missionaries didn't even know what to call him, because they've never needed one, so you had to figure out what that word is in Portuguese. So they finally found one, so that was good, and so that just kind of confirmed more that we can go there. And so that all worked out. We were there for the 3 months. We went through the first month was culture shock. How many of you are foodies? Like, you just love certain types of food, particular food? Yeah, so over there, like cheese and even the milk. If you're a big milk person, the milk doesn't taste the same as it does in America. They use the Brahma cow. The milk can sit out of a refrigerator for 9 months. So I don't know what they're doing to that milk, but it just sits there in these things, unrefrigerated. And when you drink it, I can't drink it really. I could at first until my wife made a comment, and then I always thought about it that way after that. When you drink it, it tastes very earthy. So it's like a dirt grass hint to it. And then once she said that, it was done. I couldn't, I always thought about it then. So the way I drink the milk is I put cocoa powder in it, and that solves all those problems. But it is different. The milk tastes different. All the cheese. We went to a cheese store, like it was off the highway. There were all these bins, probably from there to there, of just refrigerators of cheese and all kinds of different styles of cheese. And so I was like, okay, so I bought a couple of different varieties, like 5 or 6 different ones. We get back and we were trying to find like cheddar, because that's what you cook with a lot. But over there, the national cheese is mozzarella. I know, I love cheese sticks. I could eat those every day. I love mozzarella cheese, but it different. Some recipes you can't use that. You need cheddar cheese, and so we were trying to figure out how to do that. And so we finally found this cheese place. So we go there one day, and we try all kinds of different kinds. One that says pepper jack, one that was like cheddar. We get back to the house, and it all tasted the same. So I don't know if they just put dye in the cheese to make it orange, but it did not taste like cheddar. And then after a while, we found like cheese whip, like cheese spread, but like for nacho cheese. That kind of stuff. So it was just different. Everything is done differently there, and so if it took us the first month just getting used to knowing how to make food, because it didn't taste the same. It wasn't the same. The meat cooks differently. It's super, super lean. So we would go to the store, and my wife was like, "I want the meat with fat in it. Can I have fat in my meat?" We were trying to figure out how to say those things, so that took a while to get used to. We're only 10 degrees from the equator, and so the sun, even though the temperature is in the mid 80s and 90s pretty much year round, you're so much closer to the sun, and so it makes you a lot more tired, and you'll get sunburn a lot easier. And so just living adjustments. The first month was like that. Once we figured out some of those things, it really just started going uphill from there, and it wasn't as just hard. And we had Brazilians over to our house. Of course, we were using our phones. Thank the Lord for phones. We were able to have Google Translate out there and talk about what's garlic and how do I cook this. And then we had Brazilians over. We were all talking through the phones at first. And but we spent a lot of time on trying to learn the language, to to see how that goes, because that's a deal breaker. If you can't speak the language, what are you going to do over there? And so we worked at that a lot. After the 3 months, we came back to America, and we started deputation. If you're familiar with that term, it's just where you basically travel around and you raise prayer and financial support from churches. So you can stay over there. Some countries you can't work in. You can't get a job over there, just how the visas and all that stuff work. And so with Brazil, that's the case. So we've been on the road since April 29th, so more than a year and a couple weeks now. And we are looking to be done by November. Deputation, we had 71% came in last month, and so we only need 29 more percent. And we have a number of meetings that we're going to be going to as we head down to Texas, and then we're going to head over to Florida and all kinds of. We've been to every corner of the U.S. We've been to Maine, Florida, California, and now we've been in Washington. So it's been a lot of driving, and for all of us, but it's all right. It's what the Lord has for us, and He's helping us get through this pretty quickly. So can't complain about that. But for this morning, I'll have you turn to Luke chapter 12 this morning. Luke chapter 12. Just before I get into the passage, I didn't know if anybody just had a couple. I'll take like 5 or 6 questions if anybody has a question. If not, don't feel awkward like you have to make up a question. I'm 33. Yep, the age when Jesus started his ministry. I'm just kidding. Yep, 33 years old. I'll be 34 July 10th. So it's coming up. Yep. Yeah, so over there, like I said, Brother Brewer has been there in that town for 23 years, so he's gotten a lot of different properties. And so when we get over there, he actually has 2 different Brazilian houses. It's important you understand that, okay? They're like 700 to 900 square feet, and they're just not laid out the same. There's no hot water in these houses. The other one, there's no, we have an AC unit that he put in for us just last year. It's a little split, it's in one room of the house. It's a split level unit, brand new, super efficient, but it stays at 78 because it's just all the houses are insulated. And so it's mainly in there, not for the heat, but to keep the humidity out from growing black mold from all that stuff. And so that's kind of the house. The house we stayed in had 8 light bulbs in it. And we had a washer and a fridge. And then we had a propane stove. We had nothing else. Nothing else in the house. And Brazil was basically 220, except for our town. For whatever reason, our town's 110. And it's just weird. No one understands why our town's 110, but it is. And so, but our electric bill, with just those things, the first month we were there was the same as it was in America. The same price, $115. Now, we were there during the rainy season, and so we'd hang our clothes out, but it was a smaller house. It didn't have enough overhang for all of our clothes, all 7 of us, and so our clothes were getting soaked by the rainstorms. And there was no way to fix it. We need clothes for church tomorrow. What are we going to do? Just put them in the oven, right? Try to dry them out. I don't know what you do the clothes. So Brother Brewer felt bad, and he went and bought us a dryer. Now, the exchange rate in Brazil at that time was almost 4-1 in our favor. So now they make, this is important if you understand this because this blows my mind. They make that like almost the national wage, especially like where we're at, okay, is $1,000 a month. That's 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's electrician, plumber, contractor. It doesn't matter. You're making basically $1,000 of their dollars a month, which if you go to 4-1, it's just say $250, or $225. That's all that they're making in a whole month of work. It's crazy. My dryer cost that we got was $1,000 American dollars. So they would have to go to work for 3 or 4 months to buy that dryer and spend nothing else on anything to get a dryer. So because of those kind of dynamics there, supply and demand, electricity isn't used as heavily, and so it's super expensive. And so when we got a dryer there and we used it for 1 month, just like we normally do, our electric bill, now again, we had nothing else, no microwave, toaster, other appliances, internet, TVs, none of that stuff. Just with those 8 bulbs, the fridge, the the stove was propane. It didn't even count. The washer and dryer. Our electric bill was $450 American dollars. $450 American dollars. It's just craziness. And so, like when I first went over to Brazil, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be super cheap to live here. I mean, look at it. We would go to a Brazilian, like a buffet. You'd have a hot bar, a salad bar, and then an area where you could go get unlimited amounts of meat. And it'd be like $2 a person. Like fogo de chao. Of course, it wasn't as nice as fogo de chao. There was dust. It was an enclosed, so the highway's right there, and so as the breeze would come, you'd kind of get like things would settle in there. There'd be bugs in there, but they weren't in the food, so it wasn't like the most romantic setting. And so it was only $2 a person. Now, if you wanted to go up where you had enclosed building that's more climate controlled, it was like $8 a person or so. But still, I mean, fogo de chao is $50. So I was thinking, okay, that's all the food costs. So, man, it shouldn't be expensive to live here. We got an electric bill. And then we found out a vehicle, to get a vehicle that just fits our family, our size, is going to cost us $22,000 in our money. And that's not a brand new one. That's 6 or 7 years old. And they don't go by mileage, how many miles are on it. They go by the years because of the humid, dusty climate, how it just wears down the components. And so it's like, how many miles are on this? No, this is 6 years old. How much? They would tell me 90,000. And so I would do the math in my mind. Well, that's okay, 22,000 or so, and then tax. And so that's crazy. When our van out there we got for 3,000. Right? There's no Craigslist in Brazil, right? So like I'm a very getting frugal kind of guy, and that just doesn't work over there. You're just going to have to bite the bullet. When I got an iPhone, you might appreciate this. When I got off staff at the church I was at for 9 years, I had to buy my own phone, and so I got an iPhone. I was like, I'll get a newer one so it lasts me 5 years, so because and all those things. And so I paid like $750 out of pocket. In Brazil, it was that same phone was $2,300 American dollars. So you're talking almost $9,000 for them. So that means they're going to work for almost a whole year to get that phone. No, they have phones. They have tons of Android phones there. And so that kind of blew my mind as well. But I'm just saying there's a premium on electronics. And so what we could get for cheap over here is just astronomically priced over there. So when it comes to running a ministry, paying for the electricity over a whole property and a camp, and then having things like that, a vehicle upkeep, it's actually quite expensive to live in Brazil. A lot more than I thought. Yeah, like on our setting where we're at isn't like property to like grow on. What's already there are some mango trees, and there's a banana tree in our backyard, a small one. But the mangoes, there's hundreds of them that fall out of the tree. Now he doesn't take the time to harvest that because the time you would spend on it isn't worth the return, just because you're getting so little, like pennies for it's just not worth it. So he thought about it, but he doesn't do that either. What happens is the kids, when they go there on Sunday for church, there's like 80 to 100 of them that show up. He picks them up on a trailer. Which would be completely illegal everywhere in America, but he just picks them all up on it. He basically took a truck chassis, put on a big frame, probably as long as his platform, welded all that, and then he made an enclosure and put benches on it, and then he picks kids up in that. So, and then what he did on the sides of it is he wrapped it you saw it in the video, I think. He wrapped it in this vinyl, like a poster of the church name, because dust would come in there and you'd get all orange and just trying to get to the church. And so that kind of helped mitigate some of that. But he picks up all those kids, and then they'll go out after church and they'll sit out in there and they'll eat the mangoes. So, yeah, a little snack before you go home. So it's pretty cool. So it's just different, You have to think differently. You have to just get yourself ready for that. And so that's kind of, it took us a month to go out of the American way of doing things, and we have a certain bar of way that we run things at and expectations, and then going to that kind of a culture which is more laid back. They're not time conscious at all. And in America, it's like everything is down to the minute. So it was kind of different. And then the food and the heat and the temperature. And then the way things are done, like for you all as Americans, you know that like when you have to get your tags renewed, you can go online and in 15 minutes have them sent to you. You can go to the DMV and just get all that done online. In Brazil, the missionary I was talking to, it took him 2 days. He went down to the town. He had to drive an hour and a half to the major town. And he had to go to like 4 different places, the bank, and then the bank needed this, so he went to that store, then they needed this, so he went to, I'm serious. And then he went back to the bank, but the bank was closed for the siesta from 12 to 2. The town's pretty much shut down. So then he had to sit in town for 2 hours, just he's not going to drive an hour and a half back. So then he's sitting there, and then he goes back to the bank, he gets that money order, whatever he needed to go and to get the thing, and by that, he was so far back in line that it closed that day. So then he had to go back and then go back the next day. Something we do in 15 minutes sitting in our lazy boy, just like it'll frustrate you. And so the best advice I got from Brother Brewer, who's been there 40 years, is to just laugh at everything. Just keep a good spirit because you'll get bitter, you'll get mad at the Brazilians. And he said he's seen missionaries that they'll take out their frustration on the people, and it's just the culture. And you just got to do that. And so going over there for the 3 months that we did, it really helped us understand that. And now we know going back what we do and don't need. Like we're not taking an electric dryer because those are like a death trap, money trap. We're going to take a gas dryer, get a propane conversion kit because that's everywhere over there, and do that. So that's like one of the ways that helped us a lot with doing that. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Yeah, so interesting dynamic. So back in the day, I have found documented work that with the Catholicism, so understand that the country was 96% Catholic, like the country. You're talking over 200 million people would identify as that. Matter of fact, I don't know if you saw this, but a judge in Brazil ordered Netflix to remove a documentary of Jesus because it showed him as a gay person. Like they said that it offended the country, like Brazil. And so I just saw that yesterday in the news. I was like, wow, that's amazing. A country would do that, right? And so, but that's how strong the religion is there. And so they were that. The Pentecostal movement came on the scene in the 60s or so. And it was such the opposite message of suffering and just enduring and giving money to the church and just hoping that it will be better in the end to, hey, you can be healthy and wealthy and Jesus will bless you and have it all now. So they kind of lost a third of their base. A third of the like 60 million people left Catholicism and went over and have tried out Pentecostalism. Well, after 40 years of following this, they're not getting any wealthier. And their family members are still dying. So they're realizing this is a lie. These people aren't telling the truth. So now what's going on in Brazil is they're starting to actually, atheism is beginning to come up because it's like, well, nothing's true. For those, what Catholics did is Catholics, like I showed, is they kind of combined with the Pentecostal ways. You even have Baptist-costals there. And so everybody's kind of just following whatever is working, like we see in America too. And so the people are receptive to the gospel. They just are confused about it. So if we were to go back 60 years ago, the Catholicism and Christianity are you could easily show the difference in the two. But now it's kind of like it's a lot harder to show the difference because they have adopted so many of our terms and so much of the way that we look at things. But it's still works-based. It's still works-based, unfortunately. And so Brother Brewer told me that he's noticed in the past 10 years, as he gives the gospel, that people are more argumentative about it. They're more defensive about it. And it takes about twice as long for him to actually, for the light bulb to go off. Whereas back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was just like, it would take maybe 2 weeks of someone coming to church and they would get it. Now he said it's a couple months. So it definitely has made things harder, but they're not harder in terms of rejection, though. It's harder in terms of helping them understand it And so that's a big difference, because like I was saying, back in the day, Baptist missionaries used to be hurt. Like they would, you can go and find documented cases of them getting rocks thrown at them, being put in hospital. This is back in the 40s, 50s, when they were first trying to get into that area. The Pentecostalism has made it more acceptable message, but again, it's confusing. So, yeah. Anything else you'd like to know? Those are great. That's great questions. Yeah, go ahead. Oh well, yeah, we're definitely gonna fly down there. It takes, 20 some hours to fly down there. So but definitely flying. No, I know. Well, I again, this is how bad my geography is. I thought in my mind Brazil was always over like in the South Africa area. I don't know why it was, but it was. So then I'm like, wait a second, it's at the same time in our city as it is in New York. How is that possible? And then it's obviously right above us. So, but you could tell what I was doing in public school during geography. I was not paying attention. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we will definitely be doing. And I'm actually, next month, we're going to be loading up a truck and driving it down to a port and then putting it in storage, because we are going to be taking a 20-foot container over there. And some pastors, some people are like, why are you taking a container? It's going to cost you $15,000. Why wouldn't you just buy everything there? I was like, well, yes, it depends where you're at. When we went over there, again, we took the 3 months to find what's available, and every missionary up there said it's better in our case just to bring a container. Some of them tried to go without a container, and it was just a nightmare. It took years before they got certain things. And then he said, so you're going to, at worst, break even if you don't take a container. You're going to get lesser quality things. And then he said, if you take a container, your family will have all their stuff, so it'll be easier on them. It's like, hey, this is my bed, this is my dresser. And so we're going to take a container. And so we've been saving up for that. We planned on $15,000, which frustrates me. I mean, I'm like, surely. But Brazil is one of the worst countries to go into with a container, because the mafia pretty much owns the ports. And so I can get it shipped out of this country for $2,600, my container. That's okay. But once it hits their port, that's where that money comes into play. I have to pay them. I have to pay fees. I have to pay all those things. And then getting it from that port to our town, So I've just planned on that. We're looking at a 20-foot container right now. We're not taking our vehicle, our Honda, over there. There's no parts for that, and it wouldn't be worth it to do that. They have a whole different. They have some of the same companies over there, but they manufacture the parts differently. So if I took over, it's not apples to apples. If I needed a part for a Chevy truck, it's not the same. Even if it's the same one, it's not. It's something's different about it. And I found that out by asking missionaries, So they just said, no, you just buy a Brazilian one, and then every month pay yourself a vehicle, like put that in savings for a vehicle, because in 4 years we'll probably have to buy another one. And so I was like, okay, that's what we're going to be doing. So, those are good questions. No? Anything else? All right, well, you can ask more questions if you'd like after that. But we're in Luke chapter 12 today, and we're going to look at just a pretty simple passage here in verse 42 to verse 48. And the Lord said, who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say unto you, that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. And if that servant say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and to drink, and to be drunken, the Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes, but he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required, and to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. Now, when you look at the scriptures, you find that as we get nearer and nearer to the coming of Christ, you find that there are going to be certain qualities that are going to become more and more prevalent in humanity in general. I got a passage here for you in 2 Timothy. This know also that in last days perilous times shall come. Now listen to how he describes the state of humanity. Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. It's just when we get closer to the end, we know that certain qualities are going to become more and more prevalent in our world. We'll see these qualities more and more. And what that does, it's the spirit of our age. It can be easy to end up where Lot was. The Bible says this in 2 Peter 7, and Lot, he was vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them, in seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. And what can happen to us is very much like what happened to Lot. We can become complacent. We can become apathetic. We can become comfortable living and getting by. We can become part of those qualities that the Bible describes as the last times, can't we? We can start have less affection for what we should. We can become those kind of ways. It's this reality that as we live in this world and we interact in this world, the day-to-day grind, the day-to-day living in this environment can begin to infect us, if you will, can begin to influence us, and it can dull us to the things that really matter. It can make us not live the way that we should, shouldn't it? Can it? Absolutely. And so what this passage here does, Jesus is addressing, I believe, this very thing. We looked at Luke 12, 42 to 48. Now, to get the setting right, you have to step back for what happened before that. What happened before this? And so if we go back in Luke 12 to verse 35, he says, "Let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. And ye yourselves like unto men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding, that when he cometh and knocketh, they may open unto him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say to you that he shall gird himself, and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he shall come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, and find them so, blessed are those servants. And this know, that if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, and not have suffered his house to be broken through. Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at an hour when you think not." Now look at this next verse, it's interesting. "Then Peter said unto him, Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, or even unto all?" Then Jesus goes into verse 42 to 48. Interesting. So Jesus' parable, his whole response was given to a question from Peter. So what Jesus had said in verse 35 to verse 40, it had Peter thinking to the point that he said to Jesus, "Hey, is this for us that are following you? Or are you talking about them?" Right? You're talking about the crowd out there. Who's this for? And so Jesus in verse 35 to 40 is given the picture of a man who's at a wedding. Now, if you're familiar about weddings back then, okay, there really was no timetable for them. I don't know if you have ever looked into the cultural weddings back then, but you would never know what time it would be over. This is crazy. It could last a couple days. It could last even a week. You'd have all these guests come in, and so and they could sit there, and you have to feed them, you take care of them, and you just got married. You want to go on a honeymoon, but it's like, I have all these guests here. When are you going to go? Well, no, you don't ask that question. When they go, they go. And so, when does the wedding end? And so there's a wedding taking place, and the master is leaving, and he's going to come back at an unexpected time. And that was not uncommon, is what I'm trying to tell you today. In a world that it wasn't defined by the clock, it wasn't defined by schedules, and there was no transportation like we have today. So you'd kind of be unsure. I mean, if I was leaving from Damascus to Capernaum, how long would it take on a donkey? I have no idea. Not as fast on a car. And so it's like things could happen. And so this master's gone to a wedding that there's no timetable for, and he leaves these servants back to take care of things. So here's the servants, and he gives them basically two expectations. And he tells them that, let your loins be girded and your lights burning. Those are the two expectations. So pretty simple stuff, okay? What do those mean? Loins girded about. So the men in ancient times would have these long flowing robes which would go to the ground. But when they had to do work, that would get in the way. So what the guys would do is they would gird them up. They would take in and they would tuck in the ends, kind of like with a sash or so they could move about freely. And what they would do when they would gird their loins is it would make them more mobile. It'd make them more easy to do things and more to move about. Then the lamps burning, these weren't, like today you have a, click on, click off lamp. This is not obviously that. They had to have oil in the lamp, and they would have to keep the wicks just right so that would all work right. And that would require attention to detail. You'd have to recognize there's oil in the lamp. You'd have to recognize how the wick was and take care of that. And the lamp would provide light so you could see what you're doing. I mean, what good would it be for you if you were mobile but you didn't see the hole in the ground? I mean, it would be, so these two go together. So these servants, he says, basically, I want you to be ready for work. I want you to be ready for work. Have your loins girded, have the lamps burning. I want you to be ready for work so that no matter what time I come back, when I come here, you're ready. Okay, that's what's going on here, ready. I want you to answer, and he says this, immediately. So that in the end of verse 36, they may open unto him immediately. Now, something I'm working on with my kids is this idea of being ready for things, okay? And being ready on a certain time. And I remember, back a couple years ago, I was taking one of my sons to go get tutoring. And he just was having a hard time with I can't remember what it was, especially in school, but there was some aspect of school, whether it was phonics or something, he just wasn't getting. And so there was a lady in our church that offered to tutor him, to help him through that. And so when I'd come home for lunch, I'd pick him up and take him up to the church, and he'd get tutored. Well, I'd come home for lunch, and I would say, okay, now when I go to leave in an hour, be ready to go. Okay, so I said that. I go to leave, and he's not ready to go. Oh, I need my shoes. I need my bag. I need all my stuff. I don't have any stuff here. And I'm like, okay. Okay, well, the next day I had to come back, or the next week, he met twice a week. I'd say, okay, are you ready? Be ready to go. I was like, make sure you have your shoes by the door this time. So he'd go get his shoes by the door, and we go. You know what happened? He wouldn't have his backpack. I'm like, man, you had your shoes, but not the backpack. And so this happened for a little bit until eventually every item that he would need was finally there by the door or with him. And so it was great. So then we went out to the door, and I was like, are you ready to go? Yes, sir. Got right in the car. It was great, right? Because then there was no lecture on the way to the church. I told you I was coming. You didn't know I told you we're leaving. Your shoes, your backpack. We didn't have to have any lecture that day, did we? No, I was like, good job. You're ready to go. And we got in there. And so, what he was learning was when I said be ready, what I was meaning was to be ready, right? I was meaning I want you to have nothing else needed to do whenever it's time to go. That's what ready means. And so when this is what he says there, they go, but immediately. And then look what he says about these servants. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Look, verily I say unto you that he shall gird himself and make them sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. What he's saying is if the master has given this instruction, it's followed the way that it should be. When he comes back, if they're able to open, he is going to be so excited. He's going to be so full of joy that it's just not frustrated as workers, right? That he's going to be like, man, let me be a blessing to you. And he said he'll gird himself and serve you. That's pretty awesome. And I can tell you that my son could tell you the days he wasn't ready, there was no blessing there. And the day he was ready, it was like that went a lot better. And that's kind of what he's just painting a picture for us. And then he gives two examples to clarify what he's talking about here in verse 38. If he shall come in the second watch or come in the third watch and find them so, yeah, blessed are the servants. And this know that if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not have suffered his house to be broken through. And so he's just saying, okay, verse 38 is talking about if he comes in the middle of the day, the servant's already out working, his loins are girded about, plenty of light, and you're ready, not a big deal. Obviously, you're out there working, great. That's what you should be doing. Nothing significant about that. But then he talks about the second to third watch. He specifies that, and he's talking about this is the time between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. What happens during those times? The sun's down, everything's cleaned up, most of us are probably in bed, right? Time to rest. It's time to let the girdle down, right? To get the loins out of the girdle. And besides, who travels at 2 a.m.? Like I know we do now, but back then, on a donkey at 2 a.m., not too bright. Can't really see well. I'm sure that there could be thieves out there, so this wouldn't be safe. So he's giving this one scenario, and then he goes to another one about this thief in the night. It's pretty self-explanatory, right? If you knew someone is going to come to your house at 2:35 tonight to break in, or I guess it'd be in the morning at that point, would you be ready or would you be in bed? You'd be ready for him. But what if you just were told this, hey, in the next 48 hours, someone's going to break into your house? Well, now you'd have to wait. You couldn't just be like, well, I know he's coming at 2:35, so I'm sitting by the door with a shotgun. No, now it's like, well, I have to be ready for the next 2 days. It'd be annoying, but you know what you'd probably do? You'd probably be ready if you knew that was going to happen. And so the point is, don't be ready some of the time. Be ready all the time. Be ready at any time. And so Peter's hearing this. Peter is hearing this example. He's already following Christ, remember? He's already given up his business. He's already given up his home. He's already given up all of those things. He's hearing Jesus tell him this, and then he says, be ye therefore ready also. And he's thinking to himself, well, who are you talking to? You talking to us? Are you talking to them? And so Jesus then explains it in this parable. He talks about 4 types of people, 4 groups of people. The first one is the faithful and wise. We already saw that. Who then, in verse 42, is that faithful and wise steward? Well, who is it? Well, it's obvious. It's the one whose loins are girded about. It's the one whose lamps are ready. It's the one, basically, who is focused on what he was asked to do. It's the one who is not just focused on it, but he is actually doing the work he's supposed to do. He's ready. He's expectant of the master to come. So that's the first group, faithful and wise. Then you got the rebellious group in verse 45. But if that servant say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the maidservants. So instead of using the resources the master gave to him, he engages and abuses them. He gets drunk. He takes advantage of everything. He doesn't have any sense of urgency, no obedience. And he lived in the idea, well, maybe he'll come at some point because he's delayed his coming. He just delayed his coming. Then you got the lazy group in verse 47, and that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. So it's not that they were doing wrong, like robbing banks and murdering people. It's just that they weren't really doing what they were asked to do. Okay? Now I'm going to apply this to you very soon here, so try to bear with me. Then you have verse 48, those that just haven't heard yet. But he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. And so here's these 4 groups. And if you step back and you think about it, that covers every possible person, right? Those that are ready and are doing what they should be doing. Those that are, well, they're kind of thinking about doing what they should be doing, but they're like, maybe I'll put it off. Those that don't care. And then those that are just kind of oblivious. They're just ignorant. They're just going around. And so Jesus brings up these groups to answer Peter's question. And so his intent of the parable is for us to get something out of it, right? Okay, so what do we get out of the parable? Now, before we go on, I will say that this is a very difficult parable to get into. There's lots of different debate as to what are the 4 groups of people, right? Who are the faithful and wise? Who are the disobedient? Who are those that don't know? And some would say, well, these are like the different levels of Christians, right? Some say, well, some of these are saved and some of them are lost. One of them saved, one's lost, 3 of them are lost. Some say, well, this is like Israel, and this is like, where they should have been, but they weren't. They were killing the Messiah, killing the prophets. And so all of these things are out there, and, you say, well, which one is it? Which one is it? Well, I'll tell you this. Jesus doesn't specifically say which one it is, so I can't be dogmatic, but we can all agree on this. Don't we want to be the faithful and wise? Okay? We wouldn't want to be in any other groups. So I don't know which one is here, but I can tell you this, that I want to be in the faithful and wise category. That's the one where you get a blessing. Everything else is not a blessing. You get a blessing in this one. And I would say this, in one sense, aren't we all servants to God? I mean, aren't we all servants to God? I mean, you think of Revelations 4:11, look what it says. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. He's talking about us. So technically speaking, we're all to serve God. That's why at the end of this all, every knee shall bow and confess he is Lord, right? Why? Because we all are to serve him. Now, we may rebel against it, but we're supposed to. And so we understand that all of humanity will one day bow the knee. And so how I look at this, I look at verse 46. At the end of it, he says that he's going to appoint him his portion with unbelievers. So right there, that lets me know, well, these can't be four categories of Christians. Okay, I can rule that out. He's going to cut him in pieces and assign him his place. That's pretty dramatic. Say, man, you're going to cut a guy into pieces because he didn't do what you asked him to do? Could you imagine if you went to work and your boss said, hey, I want you to fix this and change this, and he goes away and he comes back from a trip and you haven't done that, and he's like, okay, man, I told you. And he pulls out a saw and just attacking you? Like, what in the world? That's pretty dramatic. So why would he do that? Well, remember that when this was given, those listening would have understood this, right? They would have understood what this meant. And so this idea of this cutting in sunder it was actually not uncommon in the Jewish mind. I'm going to read just a couple things real quick. So I want you to understand this. When you walk away from this, you're like, I know what this means, okay? 1 Chronicles chapter 20, there were Jews that knew about this idea. One of the Old Testament stories, in the days of David in the wars, his captain Joab, in 1 Chronicles 20, here's what it says. It happened in the spring, in the time when kings go out to battle, that Joab led out the army and ravaged the lands of the sons of Ammon, came and besieged Rabbah. And David then, he stayed in Jerusalem, okay? Joab struck Rabbah, overthrew it. David took the crown of the king from his head, found it, he weighed it, whatever. It was a fortune, there were stones in it, and he had conquered them. And he goes out and he spoils the city there, a great amount. You know what the Bible says in that account? That David goes out with a sharp instrument and hacks them in pieces. Yeah, pretty graphic. Hacks the people in pieces. Wow, he cuts them with saws and with sharp instruments and with axes. And thus David did to all the cities of the sons of Ammon. It's pretty extreme. They chopped them up. And that's probably one of the fiercest incidents in the whole of the Old Testament, I think. And what was the point? It was a warning. It was a warning to those who were not friends with Israel. This is also in Exodus 29:17, where it talks about the hacking up of an animal for sacrifices. In other words, this is what he's saying is, this is the severest judgment. Okay? This is the severest judgment that can be given to a person is this. It's reserved for this person. God is going to come back. The Lord is going to come back one day, and what is he coming back with? A sword. He's not coming for peace. He's coming back with a sword. He's going to come back bearing the sword, and he's going to come back and bear the sword on those that refuse to do what he wanted. I mean, right? Those that lived in opposition, antagonism toward his master's will, he's going to come back and judge them for that in the severest way. That's why verse 47 says, and that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared on himself, neither according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. Okay, so something's going to happen to a person that knew but didn't do anything with it. Something's going to happen. And there might be another slave who knew his master's will, didn't get ready, didn't act, he just didn't happen. He's going to pay a price for that. Then verse 48 says that there are those who didn't even know. And so maybe he was out in the field, he didn't hear what the master said. Well, what's his judgment? Well, it's not the same. He's not going to be hacked into pieces, but he's still going to receive some lashes, right? And so this is the principle he's getting across, and I'm going to bring it to us, okay? He tells us what the principle is. To whom men or let's go back to the middle of verse 48. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. This is the principle he's saying. Ready? From everyone who's been given much, much will be required. Knowledge brings responsibility. Knowledge brings responsibility. It would be better for you to have never known about the gospel, to have never known about God's will for your life, to have never known, than to have known and rejected it. It'd be better for you. When? In judgment. It'd be better for you at that point. So here, I think we're introduced to the reality that there are really different categories of people that will face judgment. There are different categories of judgment, even. Hitler will not be experiencing the same type of torture that someone who just lived out here in Washington and just never tried to follow God at all. Hitler is worthy of much more. There's a severe judgment of that. And there's going to be different categories of judgment. The more you know, the more dangerous your condition or your possibility of judgment is. And that's important for those of us who sit and we hear Scripture and we hear the truth and that we don't respond to it. Because we're going to pay for that. And this isn't God's being vindictive. This isn't God is the mean God that the atheists try to say. Here's what it is. God says, if you'll serve me, I'll come down and I'll serve you. Right? God has a blessing for us. But if we don't follow him and we are in flagrant opposition and antagonism and we just say, I'll get to it someday, we're not going to be excited at the end. That's just what he's saying. That's what he's going to cross here. What should we do? Well, Jesus says this, hey, Peter, here's the answer to that question. Just live ready. Just live ready. Live expecting me to come back. Because we understand that God has left us here to stay busy. To stay busy about our master's work. To gird up our loins. To get things out of our lives that slow us down. To get things out of our lives that impede our progress. To get things out of our lives that blind us to what we need to do. God has called us to give the gospel. God has called us to live for him. God has called us to serve him. But what we can see so much across Christianity, and we can even find in our own lives, that oftentimes we have something in our life, a besetting sin or something going on, that keeps us from doing the work we know to do. It keeps us from living, really looking for his return, because we're so focused on what's coming up next in our own life. You know what that does to us? We stop living expectant, don't we? We stop being ready. We're not giving attention to the details. We're not being ready to go at any point. What good is it if the master says be ready, but you don't have any light? What good is it if he says be ready, but you're not mobily active at any point? This is what Jesus is saying. Listen, I want you to be ready for me at any time. At any point in your life, you should be ready. And the world needs that. The world needs a testimony of that, don't they? And what a greater testimony to make a statement about there being a God and that Jesus coming back someday than for those of us who know him and know our master's will, than for those of us like that we would live expecting. Because wouldn't that make us get things out of our lives that we shouldn't have in there? Wouldn't that make us purify ourselves from sins, knowing that at any point he could come? And do we want to really be involved in that sin or doing that thing if Jesus at any second come back and see me in that? No. John talks about the fact that hope in John chapter 3, the hope that we are going to be with him, that helps us purify ourselves. When we think that way, when we keep our minds on the future. And what a greater way to make a statement to the world that Jesus is coming again than for those who God has placed as lights in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our workplaces, that we would give such attention to the house of God and to the work of God and to his words that we would actually follow them properly. What greater testimony than that? And what a worse testimony than to find someone who names the name of Christ and then disregards half of what he said to do. You know why the world doesn't look at Christianity as being very serious anymore? Because of all the things that have happened in it in the past 100 years. All of the abuse cases, all of the stealing, all of the lying, all of that stuff, and done by pastors or done by church peoples and done by neighbors, done by coworkers that said you're a Christian, but you lied to me, you're a Christian, but you did this. Listen, what a worse testimony, isn't it? Than to tell the world this isn't real, doesn't matter, who cares, than to just disregard what our master asks us to do. It makes the difference, right, how we live. And so the question for you today is this: if you're a believer in Christ, are you ready. Are you ready? And to be ready, how do I be ready? Well, just live expecting that he can come at any point. Live ready. If you're sitting here today and say, well, man, maybe you're discouraged, maybe you've been beat up, maybe you're just maybe you find yourself in a point where you're right now, maybe you just don't care. Just like, oh, well, whatever, I'm just it is what it is, and you just kind of don't care. If you're discouraged today, here's what you should do. If you're just kind of apathetic today, here's what you do. Get on your knees before your Creator and say, help me not be. God, help me to gird up my loins. Lord, help me to give attention to the light. Help me to be ready so that when you come back, I'm ready. But not just that, so that any of those watching me would recognize, hey, this person, that church, they don't live like every other church. They don't live like everybody else because look at their lives. They're keeping things out that line up with the Bible, and they're putting things in that God says, look, they are the real deal. They're genuine. Why would they be that way? Oh, it's because they believe in a Creator. It's because they believe what He said, and it changes how they live. I think if you're apathetic or you don't care, go to God and say, I can't afford this. I can't afford. I have a marriage. I have a family. I have a church. I have a world to reach, and there are people that don't know Christ. How are they going to know if I'm asleep? How are they going to know if I'm disobeying? Because this is the reality. Jesus is coming back. And you know what He's going to be looking for when He comes back? Who's busy? Who's about the work? What happens to those servants? They're blessed. What happens to those that knew better and just didn't care? Judgment. What about those that didn't even know? Judgment. What are those that didn't care? Judgment. And here's what I think makes this the most sad. I'm going to wrap it up right here. We have so many cults that are busy. The Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons. So we can go down the list of all those are the two major ones we think of in America. When I went to Brazil, do you know who I saw out more faithful than the Baptist churches in Brazil? The Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons. What were they doing? Well, they're working, aren't they? They're busy about what? Well, they have their loins girded, but they have no lamp. They don't have the truth. They don't have any light. And how sad is it that those who are living for the devil, essentially, would be more about work for a kingdom than us, who know better. Maybe you're discouraged. Listen, what do I do? Hey, go to God, gird up the loins. It's a mental thing. Let me close with this statement, this little paragraph. A church, now this is written back in the day, so you have to put your thinking cap on a little bit. A church or a soul which has ceased to be looking for Him will have let all its tasks drop from its drowsy hands and will feel the power of other constraining motives of Christian service, but faintly, as in a half dream. On the other hand, true waiting for Him is best expressed in the quiet discharge of accustomed and appointed tasks. I know that was really old school. What is he saying? The moment you get your eyes off Christ, you're going to live like He's not even real. But when you keep your eyes on Him, you know what you're going to do? You're going to be about work, the work for Him. We have a hymn, turn your eyes upon Jesus. What happens so that this grows faintly dim? And I think this morning our reality and what burdens me about when I look at Christianity as a whole, so much of it nowadays, what you see on TV is about, hey, let down the robe. Don't stop. Just, it's all about comfort. It's all about convenience. Just don't worry about that. God doesn't care about standards. God doesn't care about these things. Let down everything. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about that. It's the exact opposite of what He wants. What we are to do as followers of Him is follow Him and be ready at any moment He could come and get out of the haze we're in. Paul said this, awake to righteousness. In 1 Corinthians 15. Let's pray. Father, thank You for Your word this morning. I know it may have been a little much to work through and some of that passage and what's going on there, but I pray that those hearing that Your Spirit would do only what He can do. And Father, that You would bless and You would help us really to think about this. These things in our life that are really just distractions. These things in our lives that really don't do anything for the kingdom. Father, help us to awake from those things, and not just awake from those, but then to be about Your will. and to be ready that at any moment you could come and to live with that kind of spirit and that kind of heart. In Christ's name, amen.